This next panel will be Genealogies of 1898 Regional Activism. Regional Activism. My name is Kim Compoc. I'll be your moderator of this brilliant panel. 5 people who I'll introduce with incredibly short bios. First, we'll start with Noenoe Silva, who's from Kailua, Oahu, and is a professor of Hawaiian and Indigenous politics in the Department of Political Science and cooperating faculty in Kawaihuelani Center for Hawaiian Language at University of Hawaii at Manoa. Then we'll hear from Gina Apostol, who has written 5 novels and has received the Rome Prize at the Penn Open Book Award and 2 Philippine National Book Awards. After Gina, we will hear from Matthew Nicdao, who's a research associate at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College, whose work examines decolonial thought, racial epistemologies, national narratives, and the afterlives of empire and the literary and visual cultures of Puerto Rico and the Philippines. And then we'll hear from Dr. Marie-Therese Hattori, who's a Chamorro of Guåhan and the director of Pacific Islands Development Program at East West Center, affiliate graduate faculty at UHM and Chaminade University, community organizer, scholar, mentor, poet, tech geek, and philanthropist. And then lastly, we'll hear again from Uncle Walter Ritte, 79-year-old Hawaiian activist from the island of Molokai and CEO of the nonprofit Aina Momona, dedicated to ahupua'a, fish ponds, and valley restoration. Please put your hands together for this extraordinary panel. I just want to acknowledge we really do want to hear from all of you, and so we've asked the panelists to speak as briefly as they can to this question: where lie the shared origins, issues, and possibilities for the future? If part of our gathering is to help us really hold the trauma of 1898 and as it's impacted all of our nations, all of our peoples, all of our waters, can we also hold the question, what would a decolonized 2098 look like? Let's dream together over this next hour.
Aloha kako. First of all, I want to mahalo the conveners for inviting me to speak here. And also mahalo to Kim for dreaming up the dream question. I think rather than going over the impacts that we've all suffered from the aftermath of the U.S. Grab of all of our various countries in 1898. It's a wonderful thing to instead envision what 2098 might look like. So mahalo, Kim. I guess I would first want to say that although, okay, forget the although. In many ways, we have been, our territories and peoples from our various territories have been in conversation and have engaged in mutual support and solidarity in various ways over the past century and a quarter. So back in 1897, 1898, up until he went to Congress in 1901, Robert Wilcox, Willie Koki, whose portrait is down there somewhere, was a representative of our people, and he was in conversation with Aguinaldo and was a public supporter of Aguinaldo in the Philippines. And our people were educated about what was happening in the Philippines through the Hawaiian language newspapers. In the past 30 years, maybe longer, and maybe Walter can have a longer view of this, but At least for that long, there's been a resistance to the US military. That's an organized movement of solidarity among activists in primarily Guåhan, Puerto Rico, Okinawa, and to some extent in the Philippines as well. So activists have been working in concert with each other on these questions. This campus is also what do you call, I don't know what the metaphor is, but it's a place that gives birth to this kind of activism and cross-national anti-imperial activism. It happens on this campus. So I completely agree with the brilliant Ihileni that we also need to think about how we bring activism or how we connect our activism with community and make sure the activism is seated in community. But I also don't want to downplay the role that this campus plays in fomenting rebellion and solidarity. It happens here. We make it happen here, and I think we should be proud of that. So a few years ago, and I'm sure some of the people in this room were involved in Oceania Rising. Yes, right. And there's also, I know that Kim's involved in Women's Voices, Women Speak. These are organizations that bring together people from Guåhan, the Philippines, and Hawaii, at least, and beyond. So I just wanted to set that there, that it's, I think that the future that I would dream for 2098 would bring those relationships even closer, would establish more of those relationships. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have relationships with Cuba as well? That's been made more difficult for precisely these actions of the U.S. So I guess for my dream in 2098, which I won't see, but I think I can envision, and that would be, first of all, that we have our country. This is our country. This is not a territory of the United States. This is not a state of the United States. This is our country, and we should have our country back. And within that country, we need self-determination for Kanaka, and our country should be a Kanaka-centered country. Just as important as that, I dream of a time by 2098 where we have a refusal of the current US culture of extreme individualism and selfishness. We are living in a culture of cruelty. We need to replace this culture of cruelty with the culture of our kupuna, a culture, a society, a nation where no one starves, no one lacks shelter, no one lacks health care, no one lacks aloha, no one lacks relationship. Within that culture, this would be a culture that does not tolerate anti-Black, anti-Filipinx, anti-Micronesian, anti-immigrant, and anti-Kanaka racism, and also does not tolerate sexism, heteropatriarchy, transphobia, or homophobia, where aloha is among us all and our pilina is among us all. Our country's language is Olelo Hawaiʻi. Everybody who lives here can understand Olelo Hawaiʻi and is literate in Olelo Hawaiʻi, and any other language you like. If that comes to pass, what will we have? We will finally have a great understanding and respect for the philosophies and practices of our kupuna. We don't have that yet. We can't understand them yet. There's not enough of us who understand deeply enough to really understand how they thought, how they made these islands into a place of abundance, of clean abundance, and care for everyone. How do we do that? Yeah, we do it through our language. Our country's main value system and ideology is aloha aina. That means not only the care for each other that I just envisioned, but care for the land, the ocean, the fresh waters, and everything upon and in them. All the various beings, including the pohaku, the stones, the plants, our akua, our aumakua, our kupuna o kapo. In this dream of abundance and care, one of the things I would love to see that we need to do, and this goes hand in hand with just refusing that culture of cruelty and selfishness, and that goes along with aloha aina, is we need to have a means and enough mana to stop people who buy up and destroy our lands and waters and everything around us. Go ahead, call me a communist. Okay. And then, of course, we want to do this with our partners. We want to support them and ourselves to refuse to any longer be the launching site for violent acts of imperialism and genocide, because we're the launching site. We're the launching site for the genocide in Palestine. We don't want to be, we don't have enough power to stop it, but that's what I envision for the future, that we can stop it. Okay, good place to stop. Thank you.
I'm gonna, if I could, put this back in here.
Just watching.
Just gonna do that because I'm lazy. I also didn't see my email, so I have no idea that we were doing dreams. I'm still in the state of rage, so I'm still thinking about genealogies. Hello, I come from. I'm thinking of shared origins. I too come from an island. It's a little archipelago, the Leyte archipelago. It's the easternmost, one of the easternmost islands of the Philippines. If the Philippines is like a figure of a man, we're like the shoulder here. We're closest to the Pacific that Magellan called the Pacific, and when he landed in the Philippines, he landed on my island. My whole childhood was looking up at MacArthur's butt. There's a statue in Tacloban that we had to dance to every October 20 in front of Imelda Marcos, because that's the other sad thing about my island. Imelda's also from there. Yeah, we have all of them. We have the fascists, we have the American colonizer imperialist, we have the Portuguese Spanish explorer colonizer. Duterte too was actually born in Leyte, which is very sad, but I disown him, but I don't think my people do. So anyway, we are also, the other thing though, in listening to what people said about resistance and that how activism is at the fore of every single movement that worked, that is also true of the Philippines. From the killing of Magellan on. I grew up with activism. I grew up knowing very well that a very bourgeois rebellion in 1986 was created by by the Maoist groups, by the young students who called the regime of Marcos the U.S. Marcos dictatorship. That was always the way it was called. It was very, very clear, the connection between imperialism and fascism among students in the Philippines. I grew up with that. I know very well, as a novelist, what I do is I study revolution and rebellion and resistance, and I know very well that the names of the people, and I do love Jose Rizal. I don't know about Aguinaldo, but I do love Jose Rizal. I will say about Aguinaldo, it's very important to recognize him as a leader because he did go after the Americans. He really did. I think that's really important. So I also know very well that the people who made that revolution happen are simply not known. I imagine that is true also of Hawaii, that the tears we have are for the unknown, that the grief remains for the people who are not seen, the farmers who fought, the laborers who fought, the mothers who fought, the wives who told their husbands, I'm not going to have sex with you if you don't go and go after the colonizer. There's a whole world of mourning that is about our resistance. And I do believe that's another thing that we share with all of us here. In terms of our issues, everyone asks me, what are you getting from having been in Hawaii? What have you understood? Having grown up in the Philippines and being on the mainland, I now call it the mainland, that's new. I've been called, I'm Filipino, I consider myself Filipino, but I've been called Filipino American, Asian American, and I accept their terms for me. I can say that is not, my relationship to my identity is not, unlike with Asian Americans, not with being American. It's not with being this identity of nation, of the American state, and so on, so on. It's about my relationship to violence, genocide, militarism, colonization, imperialism, and that too, I believe, is something that I have gained with a beautiful, I think, capacious insight here in Hawaii. That it is not the American identity that is my relationship at all to my sense of self, which is, I think, I will say, I do find it problematic when I think about being on the mainland, as now I call it. But it is a relationship to history and always remembering that history. Not remembering only with sorrow, not remembering only with rage, but remembering with goddamn love. You know, the love I have, what I hear today in this group, the love for land, the love for the multiplicities of people with whom we exist. The fact that we're here with the Puerto Ricans, with the, I'm missing the Portuguese, but with all of the different groups that have also made up Hawaii, and that we center the native Hawaiian learning and love for themselves and for their land, and that we're also part of it. So my dreaming, I don't really dream. My dreaming would be the continued expansive solidarity that we must have with each other that will allow us to still have these trees, but that will allow us to still be together, speaking to each other in our and understanding that we have many different tongues, many different islands, many different ways of being, but we share. We share not in only the rage against the histories that have produced us, but also in our capacity to love and be with each other, to know fully that you are an other to me, you are an other to me. I am also an other to myself. Let's be beautifully othering with each other.
That would be great. Well, that's a tough act to follow. Sorry, just give me a moment.
I forgot to dream.
Oh, that's. That's okay. Oh. So again, I want to thank the conveners and thank you to my fellow panelists. So I am a terrible public speaker when it comes to speaking on the cuff. So I did prepare a talk. If it does start to get boring, you can just like. Oh, I'm sorry. You can just heckle and boo me up. And so I did take a different approach to the prompt, and again, I'm not Puerto Rican, and so I do not claim to speak for Puerto Rico. This kind of stems from my own study, thinking about the Philippines and Puerto Rico together, and so thinking about what does a decolonized future for Puerto Rico look like, I don't feel like I'm in the right position to answer that question, but we can talk about it. But I'm sure it has a lot to do with the dismantling of a racist and capitalist system. But we'll leave that for later. And I might ask my colleague Cristel to come up because she knows the history, and this experience is a lived experience. So with that caveat, so in Puerto Rican scholarship, 1898 is often seen as a great trauma, an event that we all know marks the beginning of U.S. colonialism in the archipelago, and whose effects continue to be felt in all aspects of Puerto Rican lives, as much as in the archipelago, as the diaspora. It's an event from which Puerto Ricans remain unable to heal and regenerate itself. And so according to, or perhaps because of this pervasive national narrative of trauma without end, Puerto Rico is diagnosed as almost inherently deficient, diseased, and deprived. So for many, there are two possible solutions: independence or statehood. It's a dominant narrative that continues to animate political discourse and structure the political objectives of the colony's dominant political parties and its elite ruling classes. So more recently, after a series of natural, economic, social, and political disasters, it seems that this powerful narrative is starting to be critically interrogated. What these disasters have made abundantly clear is not only Puerto Rico's colonial condition, an explicit admission which has only been recently come into the public discussion, notwithstanding the few more radical groups who have been thinking about Puerto Rico as a colony over the course of the last century. But these disasters have also revealed the inefficacy, ineptitude of the elected colonial government to their ability to govern, as well as the ruling class's blatant lack of concern or care for the people whom they claim to serve. So in spite of this, particularly in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, Puerto Ricans across the archipelago have had to rally and take matters in their own hands, making it abundantly clear the dysfunction and persistent failures and the broken promises of both the US federal government and the colonial governments in charge. For many, the dire conditions of everyday life and experiences and the desire for change outweighs and exceeds this oversimplified political goal of statehood or independence, as if either would or could magically and drastically undo the structures, effects, and life worlds produced by and through US colonization for over a century, a process in which many within the island, regardless of the political party, were undoubtedly complicit. So in engaging the work of imagining other potential social and political futures beyond, I think it's particularly important now to think beyond, to not just think beyond statehood and independence as if these were the only options, but also complicate these oversimplified political futures, interrogating the historical and cultural narratives that have been respectively told about them in their service. In other words, it means in part asking what either independence or statehood historically meant or looked like for Puerto Rico's diverse peoples across political, socioeconomic, ethnic, racialized, gendered, and sexual differences. Many of whom and whose worldviews have often sidelined within dominant stories or dominant historical narratives of the colonial nation. And of course, the question which I think is important to ask as well is what were those other political possibilities that have been erased? And so for me, it's been particularly important to answer these, in order to approach an answer to these questions, I think requires rethinking the histories and cultural production of the past against the grain, And that includes rethinking 1898, and at least how it's been told, right? I imagine that this as being an attempt to recover other voices, histories, and cultural work that have been disappeared from the national canon, archives, and historical memory. Some of this work has been taken up by more, recent scholars, particularly folks who are bringing into attention that's been long forgotten, the writings and intellectual labor of working class, anarchists, feminists, queer, and Afro-Puerto Rican writers, thinkers, artists, and politicians across political divides. And so I guess what I'm getting at is what the work at hand is not just imagining new futures, but also recovering and learning from forgotten or failed futures past. To think of new futures demands revisiting the past, reading against the grain of dominant historical narratives, and identifying in these past's silence or forgotten possibilities, a genealogy from which to build upon other ways of being and being with others, a point of departure from which to imagine otherwise. How am I on time? Sorry. Yeah, okay. Okay. And so when I was doing some preparation for this presentation, I'm always thinking about Puerto Rico in relation to, I went to one of these older newspapers from the late 19th century, and this was the newspaper La Democracia, which is from Ponce, which was a very kind of the bastion of the Creole elite, who were, for the most part, fighting for autonomy within the Spanish state, and many who would, after 1898, would promote statehood, thinking that perhaps statehood would be much better than Spain. So looking at this newspaper from 1897 to 1901, I was really surprised how much the newspaper was dedicated to news about, about events taking elsewhere, right? And so this was like 1897, we're talking about the revolution in the Philippines, the revolution in Cuba, in 1898, of course, the annexation of Hawaiʻi, which I think what comes clear in those newspapers is that, members of these elite classes needed to be kept abreast of what was happening elsewhere, because it would directly, politically, and economically, of course, affect Puerto Rico. And so Puerto Rican historian Ileana Rodriguez Silva observes this act as well in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was a common practice, what she calls a house of mirrors. And I think while she limits it specifically within kind of an intra-Caribbean, I think we can actually extend that house of mirrors and kind of bring it to other archipelagos across the Pacific. But that said, sorry. And this is something I brought up earlier, and she mentions this house of mirrors is the way through which we see the other, we see ourselves through the other. And so not just thinking about the house. So what I'm proposing is not just thinking about the house of mirrors beyond the Caribbean, but also a new way of seeing the other, not to see ourselves, but to see others for who they are. And so I share that sentiment of actually, I think, radical love, radical seeing. So I think perhaps that would answer the question of what does a decolonized 2098 look like. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. This is spurring a lot of new thoughts and ideas. I'm going to share 3 ideas with you, 2 challenges. Again, I want to bring a personal perspective to help you appreciate some of the issues that we're facing in the North Pacific, in Guåhan and our neighboring islands of Micronesia, and then end with a little bit of a vision that's really been strengthened by this summit and similar gatherings. A couple of issues. One that has been troubling me because I work at the policy level is the fact that for Pacific Islanders, our shared identity is the blue Pacific continent. And yet with the geopolitical competition, we see so many foreign countries, including the United States, assert an identity of the Pacific. In fact, we see legislation coming from some people who represent Hawaiʻi, the Blue Pacific Act in particular, co-opting this identity from our Pacific leaders, this identity of the Blue Pacific continent, without attribution. There was a single statement when that Blue Pacific Act was first introduced, a single statement paying homage to the Pacific Island leaders who first developed this identity. And after that, no recognition at all. America and other countries keep saying that they are Pacific nations. Although US officials are inconsistent on this matter. The Deputy Secretary of State, Kurt Campbell, who was the Indo-Pacific coordinator for the National Security Council, said in, I believe it was last year, he said, New Zealand is of the Pacific, Australia is of the Pacific. We, Americans, can't really get away with saying that we are of the Pacific, but we kind of are. But certainly we are supporters of the Pacific. He said this in a press conference when he was talking about the partnerships with Australia and others, partnerships for the Blue Pacific. I don't know how to interpret the statement. Our congressional leaders have asserted this, again, this Pacific identity in the introduction of the Blue Pacific Act. That sentiment is repeated over and over. And I like to repeat when I'm talking to policymakers that you cannot assert that you are of the Pacific and that America is a Pacific nation if we look at the record of relationships and treatment of Pacific peoples with whom America has had very long relationships. Native Hawaiians to start with, the COFA, the people from the freely associated states, and the territories, right? So it seems very disingenuous if our our elected officials from Hawaii are going to assert this. I think we, the people of Hawaii who elected them, need to hold them accountable. The second, as I said, the strategic importance of the islands in the North Pacific has led to increased militarization. US bases are planned for the small islands of Yap in the Federated States of Micronesia and the Republic of Palau. The steady buildup of Guam is ongoing. Guam has had, at times in our history, seen a third to half of the island occupied by the US military. The island is very similar in shape and size to Molokai. If you flip Molokai over, it would be the same, very similar to Guam. So imagine that, half of that island occupied by the military, and it's just getting worse. President Biden's fiscal 2024 missile defense budget includes provisions for several branches of the armed forces to develop efforts to improve the defense of Guam against the full spectrum of advanced missile threats from nearby countries. And the advanced missile threats are real. Both North Korea and China have missiles named the Guam bomb. Dr. Ken Goffigan-Cooper of the Center for Island Security and the Micronesian Area Research Center on Guam, a UHM alum, says Guam seems to have a tattoo of a target on its back, inked into the island's skin by its political status and geography. We may be the tip of the spear for both China and the US. Guam is at the top of the target list if the US goes to war in the Asia-Pacific region. He goes on to say the capability of ballistic missiles from North Korea and China to reach Guam is known. My young nieces who live on Guam recount stories of school missile attack drills. In the same way that your children, your siblings, will recount fire drills or active shooter drills in their schools. Imagine that. A whole generation is growing up with missile drills. Unlike Taiwan, we have no basements. We have no shelters. Our children have nowhere to go. Dr. Cooper says Guam is in harm's way like no other American community. Protecting Guam looks different from defending or securing Guam. Indeed, from a Pacific Islanders perspective, geopolitical competition has made many of the islands, and not just Guam, feel less secure and less protected. And in closing, my vision, and I'm going to echo what some of our other speakers have said. When we think about our cultures, our Pacific Island cultures, we need to go back to that. We do not believe or prioritize competition. We come from communal collectivist cultures, right? America prides independence, individualism, and competition. That language of competition that exists in political circles is very dangerous. It does not reflect who Hawaii is or who any of us are. And yet that's what our elected officials that's the narrative that they are perpetuating. Relationships are primary in our cultures. Policies, strategies, bilateral agreements involving our islands are not merely political instruments. They are relationships. There's an excellent book by David Hall called This Land of Strangers, the relationship crisis that imperils home, work, politics, and faith. And he's writing about America. And he says that in the history of great societies, human capital has been far more valuable than material or financial capital. The wealth of a society depends on its human capital. I mentioned earlier, American society is often based on transactions, a transactional approach, not a relational approach. And the summit and gatherings like this, I think, are an attempt to help us remember our roots, remember our island cultures where we prioritize and privilege relationships. Relationships and social capital are the most valuable and value-generating parts of a society. And so I hope that this is just one way that we can continue to develop these relationships across our islands. I think really, given from where I stand, based on my work and conversations across the region, given the current and highly dynamic geopolitical climate, the stakes are too high for any decay of relationships across the region and with external partners. So thank you for inviting me here and for inviting me into relationship with all of you. Mahalo. Is it easier to hold the mic? Yeah. Okay.
Mahalo. When I first heard the word annexation, I forgot that it happened in 1898. But I remembered what happened in 1893, and that was the overthrow. So prior to coming over here, I was lost on the island of Molokai on trying to stay alive on an island that everybody forgot about. And then listening to some of the speakers and learning that the Spanish-American War, I didn't even know who they were fighting with. And it's been a really big learning experience for myself that we should understand that we're all in the same boat in the Pacific area and where Puerto Rico is. So somebody put me on this committee, and it says, start thinking about 2098 and what a decolonized future that would be. And that started me thinking, wow, on the island of Molokai, we're in the middle of the island chain. We're like the pico of the island chains in Hawaii. And the pico has remained pretty much solid. And the other islands were being inundated. Then I remembered what the United States was doing to Kaho'olawe. And that was part of our county. We have three islands in our county. So we have 4 islands. I thought Kaho'olawe belonged to the Hawaiians already. Okay, so so on Molokai, we were like the stepchild, right? We don't have a population that can elect anybody. So the House of Representatives was elected by Maui, the Senate representative was from Maui, but we had, even our council person was elected by Maui. Today we find ourselves on the island of Molokai. Our representative is from Molokai. We elected and Maui elected, and she lives on Molokai. Our senator, she was also elected and lives on Molokai. And of course, we have our council member who's sitting in the audience right here today. Mahalo for coming today. The point I'm trying to get to is that this PICO should be like, what's going to happen to the rest of the state? It's going to happen to Molokai first because we're ready. We know that if we cannot be self-sustaining, we are not going to have any kind of freedom. We're always going to be overpowered by the rest of the islands and by outside politics. So when we started to figure out our future, we looked to the past. How did Molokai become known as Aina Momona, the fat land that could feed any of the warring islands? When Maui wanted to go to war with Oahu, they would have to pass Molokai. We were neutral. We fed them without any problems. We fed them, and vice versa. So we're in the middle, a neutral country, feeding anybody who's fighting for power. So when I see the future in 2098, I see the island of Molokai as being critical and a critical example of what should be with the rest of the islands. So we're there daily trying to figure out how to protect the longest contiguous reef system in the United States of America. One huge 14,000 acres of reef. How are we going to keep that reef alive so we can be Aina Momona? How can we stop all of that erosion from coming down and killing off our reef that's been happening for the last 100 years? We also have the highest sea cliffs in the United States, and at those sea cliffs are 4 major valleys with 20 million gallons of pristine water flowing through it, and wall-to-wall terraces, all intact, that we could never afford to build in today's economy. The reefs provided everybody with the protein. The valleys provided everybody with the starches that they need to stay alive. So we're like trying to figure out what 2098 is going to look like. And it's very, very clear that it's going to be critical that we be able to become Aina Momona again. So that's where all of our energies are centered to learning how you survive on little specks of land in the vast Pacific continent. And that's not by bringing continental values to tell you how to rape all of your resources and forget about tomorrow. When we went to protect Kaho'olawe, it was really easy to see what the military was doing to one of our major islands. Not major, but one of our islands. They were killing it. So, for us to stay with that umbilical cord with the United States is going to make 2098 a very bleak vision. So I'm here today. I had a hard time coming over here today. We've got a terrible airlines and all kinds of problems. But we need to see the value of the island of Molokai, where the majority of the island are Hawaiians. And the relationship is critical to our survival. We all have families. We all related to somebody. I mean, everybody's related on Molokai to somebody on Oahu. So we have a history. We have a connection, a long connection. Everybody knows why you name a certain name, because your ancestors did so and so, and you need to do what you need to do. So all of those things are valuable for people that live in this ocean continent. So, Tom put me on the earlier panel, and I wasn't ready for that one. Then he said, you don't have to sit on this one. Yeah, but I was thinking about introducing Molokai to everybody. So that's why I'm sitting here on this panel, is to introduce to all of you some kind of a bright future that we can once again learn all of the Hawaiian ways of surviving in the middle of the Pacific and spread that knowledge to everybody in the Pacific and not only the rest of the islands. Mahalo.
I would love for, since we're talking about the future, for questions from the audience to come from the young people, particularly Kanaka Maoli young people. So while you germinate and get that together, first I want to ask our panel if you have any questions for each other. This is such a rich opportunity to see all these brilliant minds interacting. Yeah?
I have a question because you brought up the issue of the military bases. And, yesterday, when was it? April 11, Biden met with Marcos Jr., the junior fascist of the Philippines, to talk about the bases, So I know very well that in the Philippines, there's a lot of activism against it. It's not enough. I know very well in America, there are Filipino Americans who are activating against the bases. I know very well that there's a Philippine Human Rights Act that Filipinos in America are trying to get passed. It's already been, Susan Rice, this congresswoman, is trying to get this bill passed, and we are trying to get this bill passed so that the issue of human rights is tied to military aid. But I'm wondering how you think we can build or be together, because it's the same thing, what's happening in Guam and the bases that are happening in the Pacific Islands. So is there something that you have thought about or ways in which you've seen? To be honest, I know that in New York, we are always building with we do a lot with Puerto Ricans, to be honest, because they like to party like us. But anything larger, anything that you're thinking of?
I think it's important that all of the activist groups, activists are generally so tapped out, right?
Yeah.
And not always acknowledged, right? As we heard in the previous panel. So sometimes the best energy is received by other activist groups. And it's that solidarity. You saw that with Native Hawaiians, Native Americans, right? That solidarity and connection energizes those activist movements. Guåhan is a very small island, and so our activists often feel isolated and alone. There's a generational divide as well, and so we hold our elders in very high regard. To be an activist in a culture where you have to respect your elders who do not agree with your views is very, very emotionally difficult. And so we can't always get that support at home, but we can get it from other activists. And we've seen, people in Okinawa and Guåhan working very well together, a lot of synergism there. I think, I just invite people to look for ways to connect with each other and share your in Chamorro we say kana, your mana, share that, because that I think will go a long way, right? Relationships across the ocean. Yes.
Uncle Walter or Matt or Noenoe, any questions for the panel? All right. The mic is here in the middle. Again, I want to give a special invitation to the youth, because we've had quite a lot of the elders who are the first to get to the mic. Do we have any young people eager to speak? I just want to acknowledge that I know this might be an intimidating group of people, all very experienced, but we weren't all this experienced, right? We were young people once trying to get our voice out there. It's okay to ask a question, even if you are a beginner. Hey, we got a young person.
Thank you all so much for being here. So my question is basically, how can we foster the connections in spite of our differences, in spite of our gaps in our knowledge, and use it as a vehicle for spreading knowledge and encouraging activism, especially as other speakers have mentioned, relating to the larger community, outside of academics, outside of activism, and how can we bring them into whatever we have going on here. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that was long.
That's okay.
I would encourage other young people to engage with that question. Anybody else out there want to engage with that question?
While you young people are thinking about it, Uncle Walter would like to share some thoughts.
Yeah, that's a question I was asking myself. On the island of Molokai, we know what needs to be done. And what we're finding out that it's going to take a huge shift in the young population. When you go to the educational process, you're getting ready to go into some business world or something. The whole educational system in Hawaii is terrible because they can't even keep the leaders more than a year. But how do you get the young people to do the things that we need to do, which causes you to sweat, which causes you to get dirty hands? And how do you get past all of the drugs that they're relying on for some reason? Because that's a huge problem. Like, we have the teachings of our kupuna, and we know what needs to be done in producing the fish and producing the taro and producing those kinds of things. But how do you communicate with the young people to get them involved in these kinds of things? So I'm just throwing the ball back to you, because I don't have an answer for the young people who live on this island, but I'm sure that the young people island-wide have the same problems that's going on.
I mean, I can say something about what I've seen the young organizers are doing in New York. I'm part of a group called Malaya, New York, and it's ongoing organizing. So they're very aware. They're very aware, for instance, that Filipinos like to go to fiesta. Filipinos like to and that New York is very neighborhood oriented. So they try to go into the activities of the New York neighborhoods, especially Queens, because Queens is such a big Filipino and Asian population. So they try to move. They're a very political organization. They want to topple the Marcos dictatorship, but they're making pancit with people. They're doing community activities, and it's not so much that they're proselytizing, but they're always getting names. Like who's coming, who's responding, and getting back to those people. So this is I would say, look for organizations that are very organized, that are actually organizing. They're not just online doing memes and doing nice flags. They're actually going into communities, and there are those. For Filipinos, I can give a number, but I think that's what I've always been part of. Organizers who are on the ground. That's why I know that, let's say why I talk about the rebellion of '86, because those were people who'd been organizing for years and years and years, and then suddenly people are on the streets who are not like you, Makati Matrona, all of the petty bourgeois people coming in, and they become part, and you rope them in to because the organization has already been there, So I think ground organizing and being with those kinds of groups and recognizing what they're doing, supporting them in any way you can. So that's what we're trying to do with Malaya.
Second that. No, I actually see a lot of youth organizing. So yeah, there's actually quite a lot. Ihilani, I don't know if Ihilani's still here. Maybe she left. But she did exactly, I think, what you were saying, which was she joined an organization that was already in place, which is Affirm, right? But she's done a lot of other and also SFJP. So she joined that. I know on the organizing that happened for Mauna Kea, not only were there tons of kupuna up there was tons of young people, and they organized themselves, into different kinds of groups and did a ton of work. So I'm not the person to give advice on organizing, but there are other people in the room who are organizers. So maybe Kim could talk about this. Do you want to jump in?
It's okay.
Why not?
Tomorrow.
Because here's what I think. Sometimes they're given a bad rap. I think what people have been saying, that being an activist is not what people think one should be doing, but it is actually really core. It's really core to change, and being very open to those marches, to the protests, because they seem like marches and protests seem like, you're just wasting your time. They were called warm bodies. I was called a warm body, and I was happy being a warm body in the marches against the Marcos dictatorship. All I did was march, and I think it matters. Your presence matters. Being there matters in all of these different movements that are actively trying to change in so many different ways. The many ways in which we're being violated against, and so on. So I think it gets a bad rap, but it is the way.
Right. So that's the basic job of an organizer, to bring people together, build power, inspire them to action. So as an organizer, I think about, especially the youth, how do you cultivate that iini, that hunger, that desire? And it starts with, I think, cultivating a sense of justice. Yeah, so you see things that are right and wrong. but I also reflect on, I did a short stint as a college, community college retention counselor. And in the process of being a counselor, I had to read about how to keep kids in college towards graduation, structured pathways, they call it. And in the structured pathways, with the studies that show, and I looked at the indigenous studies, it showed that indigenous students are more successful towards graduation. This is an analogy towards that. When they're more committed to their education and success, completing their education journey towards graduation. What were the factors that were contributing to that? And I think there was 2 or 3, but the ones that I remember that were powerful was, the most important one was when a student has a clear commitment to their community, meaning they want to go back and make a difference, they tend to graduate, And so cultivating that commitment to me starts with identity. Yeah. So how do we teach young students, using an example, young Hawaiians to be proud to be Hawaiian, yeah, and to love the aina, and to love water, and to understand the importance of that relationship. That will, and then when you see desecration, that will move you to action. Yeah, it's like you see it at Guåhan as family. When the water, the land is being desecrated or abused, you will be moved to action out of love, right? And I'll quote the great Che Guevara, who says, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, the revolution, the true revolutionary comes from a place of love. Wow.
Okay, we've got like 15 minutes left. All right, go ahead.
I mean, whether it's unfairness and you get angry because you're like, that's so unfair, or sadness, or love, that the gentleman was talking about. Sorry, that is something that tends to powerfully draw people in, young people, etc. When they see an injustice, when they see, something that really speaks to them personally. I mean, if they are unemotional about it, they don't care, then it's like, whatever. But if it's something that affects them personally, their community, their family, or it calls to them, I think that's, if you can establish an emotional connection with people, that would be a way to draw them in and to keep them in. That's just a suggestion.
Thank you. Okay.
I hate the term Spanish-American War. Can we call it the War of American imperialism or aggression?
Very, very quickly. I'm a youth organizer, but I'm not a youth. And so because I'm not a youth, I can't speak for what the kids are all right. I actually learn from them every day what it means to wake up under climate change. I learn from them every day what the contemporary issues around identity are, because really, there's too many color codes and things there's a lot that I need to catch up on, right? But when we think about organizing, one of the things that is so important is to not trot them out and say, you need to do this now. It's also to say, we don't say, you got to get it together. They can't get it together unless we're there to organize them. We're there to be those mentors. What happened for the Gen X generation is that we didn't have the kind of organizing and mentorship that was needed. A lot of times, a lot of us got dropped out of that. And so we had to figure, we don't need to keep reinventing the wheels. We do come from a place that reveres kupuna. We have a catalog of kupuna to draw from, who we look to. And also, we need to listen to our youth right now Because one of our great things as Native folks is we love to talk down to youth. And so we cannot do that anymore. We have to open our ears. We have to be able to meet them where they're at. And that struggle is what is difficult. But honestly, like, I can be as ageist as anybody, right? And it's being able to catch that, being able to working as an, because I was like, I'm gonna be a youth organizer. Youth are too hard. I'm trying to deal with the adults. The adults are the knuckleheads who are messing up the world. But like when I took that moment and like literally you hire youth organizers to do the youth organizing, and then they go to you for the things that they need to really get guidance on, because as we know, a lot of folks ain't trying to read, right? So like a lot of folks are reading, a lot of folks are not reading it, but like how do you meet all those generations together? Right? So that is the internal struggle that we have in the movement, is that there's always like, this is the right answer. We are not always asking the right questions, right? So that's why when, like Andre, like when we're talking about organizing, we're talking about something much deeper than activism. Activism just gets you in, it's the taste, but strategy, long-term thinking, imagining 2041 when the Pu'uloa lease ends, 2029 when the army leases end, like that 2098, all the leases are gonna be PAL and we're gonna have our land back. But what are we doing with that land? What is the vision for that Aina if they never clean the land? Are we gonna be the ones who clean it? Like all of that, those are the kinds of things we're supporting our youth in thinking through. We're supporting our youth, right? That's the question and that's the struggle. And I'm sorry, Kim. Mom.
Oh, wait, sir? Sir, there's actually someone behind you. Imai, I think we haven't heard from you just yet. Thank you, Joy.
Hello, my name is Imai Winchester. I'm going to try to share a little bit about what I think we can do to benefit the youth. I come from a perspective as I used to be youth. But I've also, for 20 years, been a teacher at a Hawaiian charter school that I've used as a vessel to create the change that we're talking about here today, to create access and to create mentorship and guidance, which I think are fundamental. And as I look at my kumu here today, those are the words that pop into my head immediately about how I was able to get to this position that I'm in. Some of you guys know that there's a super great and amazing Hawaiian holiday called Kalahoʻihoʻiʻea. And I've been a long time organizer with community members as well as youth. And so one of the things that I think is very important after some time in organization in Lahui, as I understand it, is accession and succession. Accession in terms of how do we develop, raise, cultivate identity, love, resistance, and the vision to build, and the experience to think beyond American box, to see beyond what is in front of us, and to be able to engage in the literacies of the land, of the spirit, and of the people. And so I believe that for Kalahoʻihoʻiʻea, as we move into the future, if we want to do this forever, I know that we need to get younger. I know that by doing so, that by raising a new generation, conscious, proud, that those are important pieces of what we need. And when we think about how do we repair and how do we transform ourselves as a people, we must repair the whole. We must repair the whole self, which means we must be firm and true to who we are as Kanaka in this place for us, as Kanaka in this place. To be connected and to have relationship and to have commitment, long-term commitment, generational commitment. To have responsibility, to carry kulana, and to step up to the opportunity when it presents itself. And sometimes, like I've learned from some of my kuma on the stage, when the microphone gets handed to you, or nahoi, uli, the paddle, or when the ava is given to you, drink them. And so how do we develop that amongst our youth? We show them by example. We gotta be the kupuna we want them to be. We gotta raise them to be more than they are, more than we've ever been. And I think that's a collective responsibility we all share together. So I thank you for allowing me just a few moments to share what I believe could be important to how we move forward together. Aloha kako.
Does anybody on the panel want to respond to Imai or what Joyce said? We're at the very last couple minutes here, so yeah.
I have one son and many, many nieces and nephews. And one of the things that occurs to me when we have family discussions, especially when we talk about activism and community organizing and community service, is that we need to remember to take care of our organizers. We are not tireless individuals. I hate that term. I'm always tired. My sister was always tired. She was a community organizer. If our children and our youth do not see that we as activists and organizers are cared for, it's a disincentive. They don't want to move up into positions of leadership that appear to be solo endeavors. For the sake of your community, yes. We need to remember the people behind us and around us and bring them into the conversation so that our children see that we are not doing this alone.
In order to increase participation, I think Walter is an example of that. He, for a long time, has exercised his leadership as an individual leader. And I think he's done it with God's help on his own in his great faith. And by doing that, I think we can motivate others. A lot of times being a wonderful leader is a lonely road. And I think that Walter has tread that lonely road and to see the great fruit that he has borne. So I wanted to mention that. Also, in terms of the issues that were raised about these bases, my understanding that China is building islands, and there is a territorial dispute between China and the Philippines. So this is kind of a military political issue that's going on right now. And last, I just wanted to mention, in 1843...
I'm going to be honest, how dare you be talking to me about these issues with the Philippines and China and America as if you have that right. I'm going to be honest, I do not have the capacity at this point, in terms of the issue of colonization, which, the Philippines has been this nub of this violence by America because of China, and China because of America. And I'm going to be honest, it is hugely, hugely improper, in my view, to be telling me that China also is a problem. I know that very well. I would like to say that I'm not saying that the issue with China is not important. I am saying that the issue of militarization and colonization is at the fore of this problem. And I do think that when you do these both-siding things, it makes me angry. I just want to say that. I just want to say that I'm angry.
I think that we should end on that very, very powerful sentiment. Can we all please give a big round of applause for this brilliant panel?